So today's intention is to be present. I think in today's world of busyness and craziness and news and life, many times we forget to be present. So today's intention for me is going to be to be present in this conversation.
Hey, it's Bobby. Welcome to Student of Intention, where we help you enjoy the pursuit of purpose. Remember, don't wait, start small, learn as you go. Hello, friends. Welcome to Student of Intention, the little corner of the internet where we spark, strengthen, and support self-discovery. It's just a beautiful morning here in the Creative Palace. Really excited to get into conversation with Greg Brenner, a new friend, a new acquaintance. Before we do, I wanted to start with a little story from this past week, and I actually mentioned it in my Student of Intention newsletter this week, which, by the way, if you haven't subscribed, head on over www.studentofintention.com. But it was a story with just a lot of interesting takeaways. And one I didn't highlight in the newsletter that I want to highlight here. So, backdrop is Sunday, headed across the street to Lido Marina with my wife, Tracy, in search of coffee and burritos. And we are standing, 15 feet outside the restaurant. I'm going to hand my credit card to Tracy. So we already ordered the coffee and burritos. She just needs to go in and pay. And I need to stand outside with our dog, Bernie. They don't allow dogs in the restaurant. And as I go to hand her my credit card, wouldn't you know it, it just slips from my hand, bounces once, and then slides into this crack in the wooden floorboards of the docks of Lido Marina. And I can actually see the credit card like 12 inches below the floor, but there's like no way to access it. And I'm down on my knees. I'm trying to figure this thing out. And this nice, friendly voice of this guy named Johnny, he's a rental boat worker, just down on the lower dock. And he says, "Hey man, you looking for something?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I lost my card." He's like, "I think I can help." So he goes and grabs, a screw gun, some drill bits, scurries up the dock. And this dude just, he jumps in. I think I give him a couple like, "Hey, don't worry about it, man. Like I can order another credit card. Like it's all good." And he's like, "No, I want to help." And so these floorboards are long. They're like 12, 14 feet long. And there's a huge crowd. There's probably a crowd of, 40 or 50 people around. And he just gets to it. And he starts unscrewing the screws one by one. He probably unscrews 20 or 30 screws, lifts up both the floorboards, and reveals my credit card. I'm super grateful. Like, just what a cool moment. And, he even says three things to me, cause I go to pay him. I'm like, "Hey man, like I should throw you 20 something." He's like, "No, man." He's like, "I was just telling my crew, I like to do three things every day. I like to go outside. I like to meditate, and I like to do something kind for another. It's not even noon. And, I've already done all three." So as if that wasn't takeaway enough, like if it wasn't, kind enough to just have a stranger do this thing for me. What I realized too is like right before that, I was sort of anxious about the newsletter. I was like, I've been writing, I probably have 30 newsletters that I've written over the last year. And every week, got to figure out some material that I want to write. And literally like 7 minutes before that, I was starting to think, because I write it on Sundays, I was like, man, I don't really have anything I want to write about this week. And then boom, the universe just not only drops my credit card, which at first seems like, kind of a miserable thing, right? It falls through the crack and it's just out of reach. But that little challenge, that little inconvenience not only turns into a gift of kindness in the form of Johnny and him figuring out, but it turns into my newsletter material. And I couldn't have been more grateful. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about the story, and now I'm sharing it here. And that takeaway is what I want to share, is that, when we show up, when we keep doing things, when we keep writing, when we keep podcasting, when we keep at, whatever our creative or our business pursuit is, the universe notices. Resources come to our aid. I call it alignment in the book. Things sort of show up like Johnny did and that story did in that day. And I think we can all kind of rest easy that if we do our part, these things tend to happen. And a person who I think knows plenty about that is Greg Brenner. Greg Brenner is known as the HR dad. He's the host of the Everyday People podcast. He works as an assistant vice president of human resources at that's University of Miami. And he also serves a big tribe as a husband, father, author, and poet. And when I said, he knows plenty about this, the way that I know Greg Brenner is from our connection on LinkedIn. And I just follow some of the beautiful words that Greg puts out early and often. He puts out a ton of poetry, which, as any of the listeners know, like I definitely dabble in poetry. And to see him, do it so consistently with such heart, with such fervor, I know that he's had his own moments where the universe has just plopped a little idea in his brain. We'll talk about that. Welcome, Greg, to Student of Intention.
Well, thank you, Bobby, for having me. And you've got a great setup here. I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts as well, and you're doing a terrific job. And thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. Of course.
So, I want to get right into it. I want to get right into the thing that is just this, you're an enigma, really. Like you've pulled me into your world through your words, particularly on my platform of choice, LinkedIn. So I want to start by reading a little post from Greg Brenner. This was posted about a month ago, and it goes like this. What would you do if you could be that person you want to be? Who is that person? Can you let them out now and allow that being to just be? How would you feel not restrained where there is no longer internal strife? Many of us have been conditioned to live, to be a certain way, and to behave in ways that may not be aligned to who we are deep inside our souls. We do this at work, in our homes and community. We die a little bit when we live other than ourselves. We put on the armor to go Zoom. We fake it so we look smart. We make others feel we are in control and meant to be this way. The truth is, many of us are seeking the tacit approvals of people not living who they are meant to be. So it leaves us leading in empty ways or loving others at 60% and ourselves less. What would you do? If you could be your you, you're wonderful inside. Please don't let you subside. Lead the way you want to lead. Love the way you want to be loved. Live the way you were meant to live. Take off the mask and off the makeup. Re-engage that little voice inside. Don't let another decade go by before you decide it's time to try. If you could be your you, what would you do? Onward and up. Whew, man, that thing just gives me chills reading it out loud. Thank you so much and that's just one, man. You do so many. So my question to just kick things off here is, what is it like to write stuff like that every day?
Well, I think it's for me, it's a release, right? And well, first off, thank you for reading that. I don't think I've ever had anybody read my post or, my material back to me. So it was pretty terrific there. And I was thinking it was going to be, it felt like a Matthew McConaughey. I was waiting for an all right at the end of that, so it sounded pretty awesome. So I've never really had that before. So that's really cool. So thank you for reading that. And, for me, it's just a release. And I found when I can speak from the heart, people read it. I find when, I speak from the head, nobody gives a damn about it. So it's, so I've just started to do that and I just let it flow, and it's usually spurred by something or some thought that I have or something I come across or even an event like you had with Johnny. Are there great inspirations for human story and the human condition that we all go through, I think.
100%. And love how you put that, from the heart as opposed to the head. I sort of find myself fascinated with a similar idea. I talk about it a lot in different ways, but I think the concept is thinking less and feeling more. Yeah. Is how I state it. Now, with regards to your poetry, kind of unpack that a little bit more, or just generally how you do, how you kind of go about your day. How do you get out of that sort of, I think that's kind of the condition that we sort of default to, which is speaking from the head or writing from the head or even experiencing the world from the head as opposed to the heart. Tell me more about that. What does that look like?
Well, I think it just takes you from a different place. And when so I'm a professional. I'm in, university administration. I'm in human resources. I have that job part of me. But like everybody else that's in the workforce and those who are looking for work or just don't work, they have this inside of them, and rarely do we let it out. And so for me, it's really about questions that I might have about myself, but I would say one of my better strengths, and my wife may not agree with me, but one of my better strengths is my listening. And so I love to listen to not only the environment, but more so the people within the environment. And so when you listen to people, you can find a lot of inspiration, because I just think people in general are inspiring. There's a lot of not great in the world. And so I try to seek out the people that are, and build a community around people that are great. And that means that greatness may be they're trying to find their way. It might be that they're in between jobs. It might be that they are struggling a little bit. It might be that they're winning, but there's greatness within people. And when you pay attention to, this time that we have here, which is limited, you really can find a lot of inspiration. And the inspiration also comes from asking great questions. And so what you'll find from my material is I rarely give advice. It's more at times of, trying to be a cheerleader for people that are just trying to get through every day. And every day can be a difficult space. But there's also so much good if you can change the way you look at an issue or a problem or a situation that you're in. And, so I started doing that, and it just flows for some reason. Everybody's got a skill, and I haven't always written this way. It's kind of developed over the last year and change. I would always write posts and things of that nature on LinkedIn, is my preferred platform as well. And I just started this one day, and I did it the next day, and then I did it the next day, and it just started coming very easily to me. And so I just kept on doing it. And so I continue to do it today. And it's just, it's amazing in all of the stuff that's going on in the world, what a positive group will come around, when you put this type of stuff that's out there. So it's very much who I am. It's very much, there's no, there's no makeup as we spoke in that one post. It's just me just with raw thoughts, and so I don't really care about if it's grammatically correct or there's spelling. A lot of times I force spell wrong, on purpose, just because it needs to fit in the flow. But it's also, I work in an area in academia where people will berate people for having a misspelling. So it's like my nod at just saying, it's okay to not be perfect.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Like you said so many good things, particularly about this idea. I don't know. I just got kind of distracted by that last academic, kind of situation that you're in. It's sort of funny that you look at it like that, you would get berated for such things. I think the other side of it too is like, there's a lot of people that specialize in saying, this is how you promote yourself on LinkedIn, right? Or this is how you promote yourself on social media. I don't think I would find anyone that would say this is the right structure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Man, it really works for you.
Yeah, nobody would suggest that. And, cause it doesn't fit into, what people are trying to sell or what they're trying to hawk and things of that nature. And it gets back to that space of just going with who you are. And if one person reads it, it's great. I know at least I'm going to read it. I know I probably have one or two friends that are going to read it. And that's what happened when I started in the beginning. Just like everybody else, you start with a small following, and it's grown, and, I'm encroaching, a decent sized following. And I get a lot of people reading it, and it's amazing how many people resonate with, being just kind of smack dab in the middle of life, which is kind of my article series that I write on. And it's just, people are trying to get through life. and so it resonates with a lot of people. And in the age of social media where people are just attacking and canceling each other and doing all these things, I've been on that platform probably now 3 years, 2.5 years, and I've probably had to block, 5 people. So in the age of people attacking people online and stuff like that, and it happens on LinkedIn as well, and just nasty comments and stuff like that, happens less because it's a professional platform. Right. But it's very few because it's hard to be pissed off at a positive message that's genuine.
That's right. That's right. And you do a lot of stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to talk it through the lens of the last question that you posed there in the post. So the last line you write, if you could be your you, what would you do? How do you answer that question?
I probably asked that question because I'm not sure how to answer it. Right? So many times I don't have that answer. And so for me, and I'm probably just by the age of just by sizing each other up, I'm probably a little bit older than you. I'm probably more hopefully in the middle of life. And so when you get to midlife, you really start to ask yourself questions. And because when you're younger, you're in that race, you're climbing those ladders, you're doing what you need to do to do what you want to do and to live the life you want to live. And you go through these different stages in life, and then you get hit at midlife. And for me, it was the loss of my parents, 4 or 5 years ago. They passed away, 7 months from each other. And it forces you to start to rethink about things. And it's unfortunate. It takes an event like that for you to rethink this life piece of it. And, for all intents and purposes, I've had a successful life. I don't have I live a good life. I make a decent living. I've got, I have a good friend or two, the older you get, the less friends you want. So I have a really good friend or two, that I'm super close with, and we have our health. So, but there's always that little voice inside of like, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, Greg? Are you really making the impact that you're supposed to be making? So a lot of times the questions that come out of it is just really things that I want to challenge myself with. And I'm just thinking out loud.
Love it. Love it. And then you're listening for the answers. Which is definitely the right move.
Exactly. Instead of putting it out there and demanding this is the way you need to live your life, and by the time you're 40, you need to be this, by the time you're 50, you need to do this. I mean, everybody's on their own journey. Let them be on that journey. But I love people so much. I'm always curious to know what they're thinking. And it's amazing how many people are asking those same questions.
Yeah. I mean, that little voice that you just referenced, it just takes me back to September of last year. When I sort of started asking those questions, that voice got louder. I remember precisely, like I was listening to this song, I Pure by Franco Hecke at this retreat. And he said in the song, I pray for guidance. And it was like a recurring, almost like a chorus. I pray for guidance. And it just hit me really hard. 'Cause that was me, that was where the voice got loud of like, oh my gosh, that's what I've been looking for. I've been looking for guidance. I've been looking for a little reassurance that how I'm going about my days is how I want to go about my days. And, yes, I think we're a little different in age, but that moment was pretty vivid for me, and since led to a lot of changes in how I take care of myself, how I take care of my relationships, my creative pursuits, how I express myself, how I sort of, empty myself in writing, podcasting, newsletter, etc. Tell me a little bit, and thank you for sharing your story of your parents. I'm sure that was a really challenging time. It sounds like that was kind of a pinnacle moment in your life. And you started, I assume there was some initial intention, some initial changes. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, the first thing is I've always had a professional career, but on the side, I always did this officiating football, and that I know you know about. And I did that for many years, and for 30 years. And one of the first things I did is really in my prime of my career, I stopped. And, it was probably at the height of my career. And I just stopped, kind of like that, Forrest Gump moment where you just kind of, you're running with Jenny, and all of a sudden you don't want to run no more. And so I grew a beard, put on some weight, and let's go, and so,
well, and not to interrupt, but you're right. Like I couldn't believe when I was, looking into your background a little bit, the fact that you spent 30 years as a football official, including the 2009 national championship game. So you were at some high stakes, games, right? Like this, you don't get there without putting a little bit of energy and effort into that. So I guess you were in your prime, as you would put it.
Yeah, I was in my prime, and I walked away from something that I thought defined me. And what I found out, and you don't find out until after the fact, is it doesn't define you. And there's so much more. And the reasons why I stopped in my prime had nothing to do with football. It had everything to do with family and priorities and things of that nature. When you officiate, you're on an airplane. You're on an airplane, not just for the season, but for clinics and for trainings and for going to go speak and do things. And it ends up being a whole lot of weekends and you're gone. And when you have little ones, which I did at the time, well, now they're both teenagers, one about to exit teenagehood. Well, he's still got another year. And, you miss a lot. And one of those to being a student of intention, to use your title, is, I needed to learn to be present, as the intention to start this podcast. And I wasn't present a lot of times, because when you're out of town, a phone call is great for 10 minutes or 15 minutes with your kids, but I'm not seeing the games. I'm not seeing, the fumbles. I'm not seeing the temper tantrums, a 12-year-old might have. And it gets put on your spouse or loved one or somebody else that's there. And I'm out kind of following this dream. And, when you start to ask questions, we're going back to those asking the right questions. You start asking yourself questions. Is it worth it? And I loved it. I thought that's who I was. And it just changed. So, it was an easy decision. And I went one more year than I probably wanted to. I had told my supervisor, I'm ready to go. I need to stop. And like any good supervisor, you don't want one of your top employees to go, right? You don't go, hang out for another year. And I already knew I was done. I mean, I wasn't going through the motions. I was still working really hard, but I knew deep inside is I don't want to get on that airplane on Friday mornings, and I don't want to get back Sundays and be done, miss the whole weekend. So that's what I did.
I mean, you say it like, it was this kind of quick severed move, but I gotta imagine it was still pretty hard. Giving up that identity, giving up something that you're passionate about, even with something as motivating and inspiring as your family, right? Was it gradual at all? And I think another way to ask it is like, okay, well, what did you fill that time with, right? Like, what did you gave up a big piece of you, right? So I assume like right away there was things that you put in to your days to sort of replace that, just that energy.
Yeah. I think the first thing is you deal with some emptiness, right? You've got to be able to mourn that loss regardless what the loss is. And I kind of was like, I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just, I didn't it's more of, Bobby, I think it's more about what I didn't do as opposed to what I did do to fill up that time. And so what I didn't do is I didn't watch football. Like that next season, I was so far removed. I didn't watch one snap of football, and I had lived football for my entire, most of my life. And, I didn't turn on one TV game. I didn't drive by one park. I didn't do any of that. And so that was like the first step, is just kind of getting acclimated to life without this other piece to it. But then it became, all right, I've poured a lot of work and effort into this, and I do have a lot more time, because you can spend anywhere from 10 to 40 hours a week just on football stuff on top of your regular job. And then, so what I started to do is I started writing, and that was and I've always been I would say a really good writer, but not technically good writer. I hired a writing coach to help me just through, she doesn't help me with this stuff, but I don't think she'd go for it, but she was terrific in helping me just organize my thoughts through my writing. And so I started filling up my time on writing. I started the podcast. I started, getting a little bit more active on LinkedIn. And that's where I filled my time. And then I built this, kind of this thing with this HR dad and built a following and kind of put in the same efforts that I did that I was preparing for a football game, with the difference is I never leave my house to do it. And so I'm around and I'm present.
Mm. I mean, that's awesome. And that's like, that's it, right? Is like, whenever we want to answer those questions of how, am I having the impact that I want to have? Or does this, life feel right? Or, we need to sort of mourn something and invite something else into our life. I say action is the answer, right? Like just get going. You hired a coach, you started writing, you started a podcast, you started doing these things. And then what I find is when we start doing these things, we go through this period of discovery, mm-hmm. where we start to gain awareness of kind of what we want to do more of, what maybe, what other paths sort of present themselves. Can you talk a little bit about, like, I'm sure you didn't start those writings and start doing those things like with the vision of like how you are today.
No.
You probably didn't see that clearly. What did those early sort of like awareness moments look like? What did you start to pick up?
I think, and the coach really helped me with this because I'm a big proponent of coaching, and it's not for everybody, but a lot of people have coaches that are in their lives that are, a great coach is worth every penny that you pay them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of not great ones out there, and that's just that industry. But I think for me, it was just, to your point, is to start acting and start doing things. And I think the hard part is to do it without that inside, that ego saying, don't do that. What are you doing? You need to do this, so you have all these, voices in your mind, or the voice in your mind saying, look, you've got responsibilities. You've got 2 teenagers, a wife, and one of them's going off to college this year. And you got stuff. You can't be dabbling with this stuff. But what you find is that there's a gravitational pull. I think everybody's got a gravitational pull. And I was listening to one of your episodes. There's just one recently, I guess, I may butcher the name of the place that you're at. Tulum. Is it Tulum you went to on vacation? Okay. Yeah. And you talked about, I think it was a waitress, and kind of getting present and listening to the environment and listening and really being, mindful of your surroundings and the environment. And we don't do that. We don't do that when you're in a busy life, because you're running all the time. And I was like, when I was listening to that episode, it was like, man, that's so on point. And that inspiration comes from somebody who's working hard in probably a labor job and doing their thing. And there's so much, goodness in that environment, but you have to allow yourself. I think one of my biggest learnings is you have to allow yourself the space to be able to do these things. And instead of shutting it off right from the beginning. And a lot of us do that, like, no, why would I do that? I mean, when I thought about the podcast for a year before I did anything with it, because that stupid, little voice in your head going, who's going to listen to that? Well, now thousands of people listen to it. It's like, okay. All right. So they're listening. Well, you should do something on HR. Well, I kind of like listening about people's stories, so I'm going to keep on doing this. Well, you should probably niche down and do it. Okay. Well, I kind of like doing it this way. So, allowing you the space to do it, especially when you don't have to rely on finances to be able to do it, it's helpful to just allow yourself the space. And sometimes, and I've learned over the years, I've allowed things to go on too long before I've allowed myself to go in a direction. And so the sooner you can get to
allowed things to go too long. Can you give an example?
Yeah. So for instance, I used to be in the restaurant business, and I'd failed business. I had to close the doors on a business and, everything that goes with that and bankruptcy and the whole thing. And it took me years to get over that. Mm-hmm. And because, I was, in my own mind's eye, I was a failure and I thought everybody was looking at me as a failure. But the truth be told is that nobody gave a damn. I failed. They're trying to live their own life. And here I'm sitting there with this baggage that I'm taking, for years with me, afraid to, let me get back to something a little more stable. Let me get back to, paying my bills on a regular basis. Let me get back to these things. And in many ways, you still try to put that behind you because you have that little piece of you saying, well, you're going to fail again. It's like, oh man. So taking that and allowing you the space and allowing yourself to take the time just to create, to be, and get your thoughts out of your head on paper. And that's just been one of the biggest things that I've been able to do. That's just been so helpful for me. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, obviously sorry to hear about the restaurant.
Yeah, it was like 20 years ago. I mean, on the video, you'll see that I have no hair, but that's where I lost it, just for the record.
Well, and I mean, that's growth, man. That's like, I love that you talked about, no one really caring, right? Like we think of that failure so much more than others do. And I think the difference too is when we set out to do things, or even when we just think about doing things, we get so caught up in expectation, right? And it sounds like with at least your writing, and maybe this is different than from like your restaurant or anything else that you've done, like you just didn't have expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I wrote a post, this week, and it was on, I think it was actually, I may have posted it this morning. I don't remember now. But I can't remember, but it was on who do you trust? And it really was, asking questions around the concept of why do we trust others first than before ourselves? And it happens so many times where we just, and I did a poll to it. I think the poll answers were, do I trust your mother-in-law first? Do you trust, a spouse, a friend, or, a lover? The third one would be your favorite news channel. And, the fourth one was yourself. And, yourself is not leading. It's leading the pack at like 73% of the poll. But it's not 100% of people out there believing in themselves.
I just checked it out. It's second place is your spouse, lover, or friend.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's actually people that vote for their news channel that they believe they trust the news before they trust themselves, which is scary, regardless of which news channel you watch. So, but we don't take the time to trust that voice. And I think that's where a lot of my writing has been focused in on, and just, trusting that voice inside that, and a lot of people resonate with it, especially this last year and a half with people just, layoffs and furloughs and losing businesses and sickness and illness and all those things that happen. And then out of these times become, if you're intentional about it, can be a lot of greatness that comes out of it as well. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, I mean, it's such a great post and such an interesting dilemma, right? This trusting of oneself versus trusting all the external sources. And, as I've gone along this journey of living with intention, I've sort of evolved the idea a little bit. At first it was like living with intention. And then after writing and sort of like thinking about it more and more and practicing, the practices that go along with my current, journey of living with intention, it evolved to, all right, I think it sounds better. Like I'm enjoying the pursuit of purpose.
Yeah.
And And don't get me wrong, both living with intention and enjoying the pursuit of purpose still hold a lot of weight. I think they still say the right things. It wasn't until recently I've been like, you know what though, what I'm really going through and what, living with intention actually, like how I would define it now, is a period of self-discovery. Mm-hmm. And I think why that trust thing is so challenging, and I'm curious your thoughts as well, is a lot of us don't know ourselves. Like we don't even practice knowing ourselves. I think even if we do practice it, like it's still sort of a fleeting, idea. It's still like always changing, right? We're still always changing. There's always more to chip away at to kind of figure out like, all right, what's that authentic self, really like? Would you agree?
I would probably take a little bit different angle on that. And from the standpoint of, I think everybody knows who they are inside, right? Like if I were to ask you, what are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? You probably can answer it. Like if we are able to get to your deep down, now I'm not talking, doing a psychoanalysis and stuff like that. I'm not talking about that, but just knowing, I know deep in my thoughts, I've got inner thoughts that I am absolutely keenly aware of. Now I may not let them out, but I'm keenly aware of them. And what happens is then we start to put drywall on top of that. And then we put down some plaster, and then we start to put on a coat of paint. And then we don't like that color of paint. We're going to put on another coat of paint. And then before you know it, you're not anything that resembles that person inside. And people fall into that trap. And I don't know many people that haven't fallen into that trap. And it becomes that pursuit of purpose, or it becomes that being a student of intention that forces you to think differently. So for me, I think everybody that comes in contact, I've never spoken to anybody. I do a lot of executive coaching at work and have some clients and stuff like that. I've never met somebody who doesn't know who they are at the core. Okay. Whether they want to share that or not is a different story. Whether it's uncovered, and it could range from anything, Bobby. It could be from, what you're thinking right now and who you are. And is this the life that I want? To, I'm having a grand time. I didn't think I was going to be in this life. It's going pretty good. I've got a wonderful wife, and I've got, I can take trips. I can do things. It's not so bad. It may not line up exactly who I wanted to be just yet, but I'm getting there. Right. As opposed to, I'm living a life that just is not in alignment with anything that I want it to be in alignment. And that's where people get down. And I think that's where people struggle with, all kinds of things that have negative impacts on somebody's psyche. But for me, I think it may not be clear. What may be muddy is how you go about uncovering that person, allowing that person to be, as opposed to, I don't know who that person is anymore. And I'm sure people go through that. But for me, I think people know intuitively, they know they may not listen anymore to that person. I think if somebody goes out and wants to start drinking and stuff like that and doing those things and having a great time, that person knows intuitively that I just want to fit in. I just want to be able to do this, but I got to do this to be able to do that. I see that in kids all the time. The art of trying to fit in changes who you want to be. And I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter, who's 15, who's terrific, is one of those type of people that knows who she is, right? Knows what she wants. And for that reason, she gets left out of a lot of different things. And it's a choice she's making to be intentional about her life to be able to do that. But that can be lonely, right? So that could be lonely, and that could be a difficult space. But thankfully, you're strong enough, and probably stronger than me, to be able to say, that's not for me. So she doesn't get involved in the stuff that other 15-year-olds are getting involved with right now. So that's my 2 cents on it. I know it's a little bit different angle, but I don't know.
I think you're saying the same thing. Or maybe I'm just being selfish here, but yeah, no, I really like how you put it in regards to sort of covering, that inner self with, the house metaphor, drywall, paint, stucco, what have you, right? I guess I just think sometimes we do that, to our own demise without knowledge, right? Like, and I do agree with you. Like, I think we all go through it, right? It's kudos to your 15-year-old for sort of like, fighting against that force early on in her life. I think the art of fitting in, that's a great phrase as well. And one that I think just early on in my life, I was like, oh, I'm going to master this art. And in doing so, I put on a lot of drywall. I put on a lot of paint and stucco. And so, yeah, so I think it's still the same thing. It's just the fact that, like, yes, that's fair that people know deep inside what it is, but they've got a lot of distractions. We've got a lot of distractions. And I do think it takes practices. It takes things like writing. It takes things like going on a entrepreneurial pursuit or a new job or a new relationship or a new health kick. Like, it takes these things, these sort of platforms of action for us to start chipping away and saying, oh yeah, there's that thing. There's that person inside there.
It's the trigger, that lever that allows you to open up and start to gain alignment. Right. And the further we're away, from that purpose piece of it. And there's a lot of other folks out there that just don't believe in this whole purpose stuff. It's warm and fuzzy stuff. But the more I feel I can be in line with my purpose, forget it. There's no makeup needed, right? Because you're in alignment and you're ready to go. And so it just works for me. The more you can be aligned, and there's times that you're not, and it. And once you're aware of that, it becomes really uncomfortable because you don't want that disalignment.
That's right. Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of people, and it's kind of natural. Alignment is sort of this like murky, sort of intangible thing, right? And everything I read, like, there's a lot of people that talk about this alignment. I'm actually going to quote Stephen Pressfield from his book, The Artist's Journey. But before I do, like, I think alignment also goes both ways, right? Like, if you are going down, if you're going down a path, I think, you brought up the example of like going out drinking, et cetera, like, you will get alignment. People will go down that path with you. You will find more opportunities to do that because that's your intention. And it's funny. It's like, when that happens, we sort of accept it. But when, we see people, like you, for instance, go down this kind of crazy, sort of odd rabbit hole of talking about everyday people on a podcast or writing poetry on LinkedIn, we're like, why would any alignment show up for that? But I guarantee you have an example. So I'll quote this real quick, because I'm just genuinely curious, once you started doing this work, like, how it showed up. So in Stephen Pressfield's book, The Artist's Journey, he says this: it operates in real time and in the real world. It is connected to forces unconstrained by time and space, by reason, or by nature's laws. It is capable of summoning allies and assistants and of concentrating them on your behalf and in your cause. These forces are not only of the imagination, ideas, insights, wisdom, breakthroughs in your life and work, but also practical and material apparitions like friends and allies, connections, places to stay, money. And that's just one example. Literally, I read so much where they talk about, hey, like, once you get going, once you start taking action, once you start discovering like these new paths and going further down the rabbit holes, like, good stuff starts to show up to help out. Has that shown up in your world at all?
Yeah, I think it shows up. People show up at the right times, I think. And it's, they show up in your universe for a reason. I don't know. You don't know that at the time. But then the other piece of it is that you have a gravitational pull to doing what you want to do. And that starts to grab you. So it's that double-edged piece of that, the gravitational pull, but also having that ability to, be who you want to be, and allowing it to happen.
That's the word you used that earlier. I really like that gravitational pull. You must be using that more and more. How did that sort of surface in your brain? Can you tell me a little bit more about gravitational pull?
No, I think I just thought of it with us
Really?
speaking
This is
today.
new?
Yeah, it's new. So it sounds like
I
it's
saw you
ready
writing
to
it
happen. I've been writing a lot of notes for you. You've been throwing a lot of great dimes out there today. I always like to make sure I come back to. When you get old, you forget things. And so I want to make sure I capture them.
Oh, the gravitational pull, that better show up in a post tomorrow.
Yeah. And so it's just this thought of, whether it's that alignment, whether it's that little person as we've been talking about, or where is that pull taking you? A lot of people in my posts will turn to religion, and I'm, and I'm down with whatever because it's not about me in these posts and stuff, even though it's my thoughts and things of that nature. It's really about hearing from other people and giving them the space to do it. But that gravitational pull is about taking us where you want to go. And what's taking you where, and who's taking you there, and is it you or is it other people? So, I think it's a concept I'm definitely gonna have to flesh out a little bit more as I write a little bit about it.
Well, let's take two practical examples. So you weren't always a university administrator. That is still relatively new. I know you've been there several years, but I think you owned a restaurant before that. You were a referee before that. So that's somewhat new. You also wrote a book. When did you write your book?
Well, actually, I haven't written a book. I've been thinking about writing a book, but I write an article. I write articles within LinkedIn. It's called Smack Dab in the Middle of Life. And so, I'll probably write a book around that same topic. So we're just, getting ready to launch.
How long have you been doing Smack Dab in the Middle of Life?
It's been about 2 years or so.
Cool. So yeah, like let's take those two specific examples. So, or one of those two, right? It can be either your work at the university or it can be smack dab in the middle. Have you sensed any gravitational pull around either of those? Like to either start one of those, or once you got going, like what sort of resources presented themselves to kind of help that project along?
Well, I think yes and yes on both. Right. And so, I think for me, and it's happened with my football career as well, what was an avocation became a very big part of my life. And so I think this piece of it, of the writing and doing these things, have become a really big part of my life. It's my after work stuff, right? So it's doing these things, after work and writing, early morning or late night or whenever I write it. But what came into my life was, getting involved in LinkedIn, meeting some really good people. I've got a very, very dear friend that I didn't know before LinkedIn that we've become close. We've met each other. We've hung out together. We've bonded a great relationship. He went through a similar journey, and that gravitational pull has grown, taken him in different places. I was able to find a writing coach that saw my writing online and just had reached out to me and say, I'm not calling you for business. I'm just telling you, I love how you write. And I just wanted to let you know I do this for a living. Keep doing your good work. And I was like, I said, I need to talk to this lady. And Martha Finney became my writing coach. And it was just based on it. And she wasn't cold calling me. It was not a cold call at all. It's just like, this is like some Irma Bombeck stuff from her generation that, people were just writing about life. And sometimes, my stuff in the past is a little bit more humorous, but it's still a poke at life. But, and so different people have come into your life. And then on the work side, I'm surrounded with great people and in a vibrancy and an energy that you can only get on a college campus. And so there's a gravitational pull there. So to me, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both.
Oh, absolutely. And the writing coach thing that just kind of resonates with me a lot. When I was writing my book, I got introduced. So it was like 3 degrees of separation. My friend Kevin, who we went to Ohio State together, like acquaintances. I wouldn't say we were like close friends at that time. But he caught wind of the newsletter and said, hey, like I know this guy in California that self-published, and he was a transplant from Ohio. So he introduced us, and he was a great resource. Just if nothing else, just to give me a little context and confidence to like, all right, man, keep going. You can do this. I've self-published 3 books and, et cetera. And then he introduced me to my editor, this woman named Jennifer, who it was just this magical moment when I met Jennifer, where she was reading Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. I checked out her website before I talked to her. She's also a poet. And she likes to coach poets. The first page of my book is a poet, or is a poem, I should say. And then, like as soon as I met her, like she just asked the perfect questions to sort of like unpack what I was thinking and sort of nudge me into, being a little bit more patient, letting, kind of tease the stuff out of me that ultimately made that book. That's just such an awesome feeling. It sounds like you've kind of had a similar experience with your coach, and you guys still work together, right?
Yeah. It's, and I don't really work on this piece of it. It's more about the book stuff, but it's, like I said before, a great question, and they're just so good at their craft, and it's allowing, I think one of the things that she taught me, and I don't know if your coach, you've kind of got the same thing, is sounds similar, is, there was a book called Bird by Bird, and I forget by who, and it's a book about writing. And the writer talks about the first, shitty, excuse the language, meaning the first shitty, which is your first draft. And so my first draft is supposed to be dirty and ugly and not pretty. And then you come back and refine it. And so she was teaching me how to do that. Obviously my posts are more raw and more, so a little bit more refined when I work with the coach, but allowing yourself to have a crappy, start and just refine it, so that taught me a lot to just get it on paper, and then we can work through the editing piece of it.
That's right. And yes, huge proponent of coaches. You said that in the beginning. I think they're most intentional of relationships, right? Like they have a purpose specifically towards you, helping you find that authentic self that maybe is covered by plaster, paint, stucco, windows, etc.
Asbestos is growing there. All this stuff is growing. Black mold is out there. It's coming to get you.
Good coach gets in there and starts chiseling right alongside you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wanted to ask this question earlier. It sounds a little silly now, but I have to ask it. Well, first, do you watch football anymore?
I do. I've started watching a little bit. I still don't watch at the same level that I was in it before. And the crazy thing is I watch the officials and not necessarily the game. So it's hard for me to, watch the game for entertainment purposes.
Yeah. No, I've always been a huge fan. I went to Ohio State. They won the national championship while I was in my sophomore year in 2002. I do find myself watching less too. Just, maybe it's a writing thing. I don't know. I'm just giving energy to other things. But as a referee, I have to ask, I assume you watched that national title game between, the Hurricanes and the Buckeyes in 2002. Yeah. And for the listeners, anyone that doesn't know, it was a very controversial end to the game. I believe it was triple overtime, certainly double overtime. And we threw a pass into the end zone, and the referee called pass interference on Miami that gave us another shot. I gave us a first down and ultimately allowed us to win that game. Very controversial call, particularly I think if you reside in Florida. Curious your take.
Yeah. Being a Miami native, I've never been asked this question being an official. No, that's not true. I think anybody who's had any kind of football knowledge and knows about Miami and Ohio State, that's the first question that comes. And the funny thing is, I've watched that play a couple times. I never saw it live. I didn't see the pass interference live. And that's the point of a lot of Miami fans, that there was no pass interference. So it should not have been called. But the other piece of it is that, I think there was a delay in the call that really kind of shook the Miami faithful. And the delay is what, really got to people. And then, and where exactly was the call and things of that nature. But I think there's a lot of lessons in that boy, we could talk a whole nother session on this. I know we're tight on time, but the delay in time when you're in a crucial part of anything in that particular game, you don't have to be quick, because being too quick messes up your judgment, but being too slow can also mess up your judgment. Mm-hmm. And so whether he was right or wrong, he made the call. There was no replay at that time. Not that it would have been overturned in the rules that later came with replay. He came with conviction, and eventually, and it changed that game, and really the outcome of that game. Rarely does one call change the outcome of a game. That really changed an outcome of a game. And so whether he was right or wrong is neither here or there. For me, it's really about, one, he was there. So I always give the credit to the guy that's there, or the gal that's there actually doing it. And then instead of a lot of us armchair quarterbacks, but at the end of the day, there was a delay, and it changed the outcome of the game. And for all purposes, it was called, and it was the right call because it stood, and nobody else came in and kind of changed that. So, Miami fans will always take that to their graves, and Ohio State's fans will always say, we beat you fair and square. So it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think for the vast majority of each of those fandom or fan groups, you're 100% right. You just made me think of this, and I don't think I've ever talked to a real professional referee, so I've got to ask this question too. So you made me think of, like, you weren't there live, and I watched that game with a close eye, the whole game, and I consider myself a more objective fan than most. Like, I try really hard as best I can, even when I don't have especially I should say, when I don't have a stake in the game, like to be as objective as possible, particularly with the referees. I think with instant replay, one of the downsides of it is like that craft of refereeing a game has just gotten to a microscopic, like, it's just like we're whittling away at perfection here. Like we need to calm down. And what you made me think of was, like, in the grand scheme of things, like throughout that whole game, if we were to say the equilibrium of fairness, for lack of a better phrase, it was that call, like, sort of like tipped the scales in equilibrium of fairness is how I would put it. Like, there was a lot of crazy stuff that went on in the game, right? Like, you may not remember, but like Maurice Claret, like, lost a fumble and then ran down and grabbed it back. And like, there was a lot of, crazy things and interesting calls along the way. And for however you want to take this, like, I felt in that moment, yes, it could have been called either way. And I think it was a 50-50 call in the purest sense. But I was like, all things considered, it actually was the right call when you take in the context of the entire game. As a referee, does that make sense to you? And do you feel that, like, sort of flow and energy of the game, like, sort of play out in calls like that?
Yeah, for an official, you train so much for those moments, and you never know until you're in those moments. Now, that's a different kind of moment. And I lived those moments when I worked the championship game. I worked in the 09-10 game. And unless you're there, it's very, you rely on your training. It's very much like a pilot. When things are going, you just rely on what you've prepared to do. And so either people are going to rise to that moment and make a call when it matters most, or they're not. And sometimes your judgment is going to be right, and sometimes it's not. I know from officiating standpoint is I know in football, and I don't know about the other sports, you don't make up for things that happen in the past and things that's fan talk. But you never make up for something that happened earlier in the game or not in the game. It just doesn't happen. I was in that game for too long, and I never saw that ever happen. There are some bad calls that happen, but they weren't on purpose, I don't think. And so I think you try to manage the game, and you try to make decisions the best you can based on your training, and you get them some right, you get them some wrong. And
and I want to be clear, because this gets thrown around in the NBA a lot, particularly in NBA. They always like talk about makeup calls, right? And it's like, oh, a foul gets called at the one end that wasn't really a foul, so then they immediately go back and call. And I'm not talking about that, right? Okay. I want to make sure I'm distinctly saying like it wasn't a makeup call. I don't think that the ref was making up. I think it was like just time and place, all things considered, like it felt right. Like it seemed right. Like all things considered, all things given, it didn't feel like it went against the grain of I guess here's the flip side. It didn't say, from a Miami perspective, it wasn't so egregious that it looked like he did it on purpose or that it was like a bad call. Right. It looked like it was a 50-50 call and it went the way that it should have, given how everything else played out over the course of 4 quarters. Right.
And I get that. And I think the one people, from an officiating perspective, when you're going through the training, they would ask, supervisor would ask, or officials would ask too, would that have been, cause you get graded on every play. So you get graded if you did it right or wrong or different every play. And, if, the question would be, would that have been a no call if you didn't throw it? And the overwhelmingly part, a lot of people would say, yeah, it probably would have been a no call. And so, anytime you put your call down and it makes an impact in the game, in the overall scheme of things, there were mistakes throughout that game and they all seem to even out. It's when the game is on the line, which we call a game impact call. You want to make sure that it is as big as it needs to be. Like everybody, from Mother Teresa to Stevie Wonder knows that that's a pass interference. There's no debate. Right. And I don't know if that ever happened or not, but again, he was there. Miami fans will never let it go, and Ohio State fans will always say it was the right call. I've never met one that has departed. It'd be like you, marrying somebody from Michigan and allowing to have a Michigan Wolverines comforter on your bed. It just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. So
nope. That's right. Oh, Greg. Well, thank you for humoring me with that conversation. You're right. We could, that's a whole nother pod, a whole nother day, but glad to reminisce with you a little bit about college football and something that was more near and dear to our hearts, I think, several years ago, but still has a special spot. And thank you for sharing. I guess just to wrap things up, Greg, I want to support your work. I support your work already. How can my listeners, engage with Greg Brenner further? What's maybe on the horizon that people students of intention should keep an eye out on?
Well, you can always, find me on LinkedIn. Just love that platform. It's professional people just trying to do good work. So I hang out there most. So if you check out my posts there, and, it's mainly around writing that I have there. So you can check that out. And also my podcast is the Everyday People Podcast by the HR Dad. And so that's another, give a listen and, review, and, love to have you stop by. So those parts are good. And on the horizon, we'll just continue to find this. I'll continue to be that student of intention and trying to, find my path as I continue to write, as I get into the golden years of life, and, we'll see where that takes us.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much, and keep up the fantastic work. And, again, thanks for all your support over this time and inviting me on the show.
You got it. Hey, it's Bobby. Thanks for listening to today's show. For more, follow Student of Intention at www.studentofintention.com. And remember, don't wait, start small, learn as you go.